The mere mention of the name Moses awakens different images in the minds of many people. Moses' death is wrapped up in some kind of mystery in the Bible. We know that he died at the age of 120, but his eyes were not weak, nor did his strength fade. Despite his age, Moses was still at his peak when he was called home. Moses was prevented from entering the Promised Land because of his disobedience in the waters of Meribah Kadesh. He took the Israelites to the banks of Canaan and received a vision of the land, but was not allowed to enter it. At the end of Moses' life, God gave him a vision of the land by which he had left Egypt. Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah. Mount Pisgah has an elevation of 1,372 meters, almost 1 kilometer high. There are not many men of 120 years who can climb a mountain almost 1 kilometer high and live to tell the story. But Moses managed to climb with his hands. There was not a long trail long enough for Moses, and he did not need one. If you are wondering what condition he was in, this fact will tell you. However, there was Moses, almost a century and a quarter old, climbing to the top of a peak of 1,372 meters and having a lot of fun. Once there, Moses was not full of self-pity. He knew he was going to die, for God had told him, and the Lord had already designated another man, Joshua, in his place. Before he died, despite the responsibility of guiding the nation, he was taken off his shoulders. For the first time in the last 40 years of his life, Moses could take each step and climb the slope with light shoulders. He was well aware that he was about to give his last breath at any moment. When it comes to the subject of death, Moses teaches us that a believer has no reason to be afraid or run through the streets in a state of panic. Death is an inevitable part of existence for each of us. Before we are truly prepared to live, we must first be prepared to die. Imagine the dazzling sight that spread before him. Moses looked, and the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead to Dan, and all of Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and the whole land of Judah to the western sea, and Negev, and the plain in the valley of Jericho, the city of the palm trees, to Zoar. This is what Moses was waiting for as he absorbed this last visual feast of the Promised Land, a property that he would never set foot on. That was it. God wanted him at home. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land that I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I let you see it with your eyes, but you will not pass through there." So Moses, servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab according to the word of the Lord. Moses delivered the Spirit. Whether we are heroes or not, we will all reach the point in our lives where we must abandon our bodies and pass to another kingdom. Perhaps this is what makes death so frightening to some. We are rarely alone. On the other hand, Moses is completely alone at the top of Mount Pisgah. Joshua was not allowed to accompany him in any way, and Aaron had already disappeared on the rocky trail to the peak, where there was no discernible trail. There was only a lonely figure to be seen. The next thing that arises is the security of death. Moses died according to the word of the Lord. The life of man came to an end exactly as God had planned all the time. Moses died alone, but in peace. The account of his death is contained in the last 6 verses of the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34. Death has a way of putting things into perspective, doesn't it? What a way of living! 120 years and you don't need glasses, a century and a fifth, and you don't need crutches. You can't help asking yourself about those Hebrews who frequently complained and worshiped Moses. Was he just a convenient target, a lightning rod for their discontentment? Were they inclined to think of him as some kind of distant and deep man of God? The answer is in verse 8, when he died. Deuteronomy 34:8. Then the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. The days of weeping and mourning for Moses ended. Oh, how the Israelites will miss the wise counsels of their late leader. His work among them awakened their emotions to such an extent that it took a whole month for them to lament his departure after he had left them. But finally, this mourning came to an end. Verse 6 contains one of the most remarkable statements about the remarkable career of Moses. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab before Beth Peor. But no one knows where his grave is to this day. Moses is the only person in the Bible that God personally buried. Did you know that? The Lord then hid the grave. Why did he do that? Because that grave would have turned into a sanctuary. They would still be making their way to Nebo today, erecting sanctuaries, selling popcorn and peanuts, offering several tours, and perhaps even running a cable car to there with large posters proclaiming the place of burial of Moses. So it was hidden. This was so crucial to the Lord that it even provoked an angelic confrontation. Judas verse 9 contains one of the strangest accounts in the Bible about this event. Judas writes, "But Archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil, Satan, and arguing about Moses' body, did not dare to bring an abusive condemnation against him, but simply said, 'The Lord reprimands you.'" It seems that the devil had his own ideas about what he could do with Moses' body, but God replied, "Never. I claim the property of your body in the same way as I do with your soul, and I intend that the tomb should remain unknown for all time. All things have their right ending, as well as the story of Moses. Since then, there has been no other prophet in Israel like Moses, who knew the Lord personally, and this is because of all the miracles and signs that the Lord sent Moses to do in Egypt against the Pharaoh, his servants, and all the land of the Pharaoh, as well as all the great terror and power that Moses showed before all of Israel. The famous historian and French philologist, Joseph Renan, once said about Moses, "He is a giant among the figures of humanity." Renan was talking about Moses. Most of us, when we read this part of the story and think about all the great strength and miracles that Moses did, tend to think that Moses is on a unique level. We cannot reach the greatness of Moses. The life I observe seems like a distant theoretical study. Sometimes it almost makes me feel inferior for not being like him. Moses was, without a doubt, an exceptional figure. But in the end, he was only a man serving God. However, there is much we can learn from studying his life and his death. Through his actions and the way he led the people of Israel, Moses offers us valuable lessons on faith, leadership, and obedience to God. He shows us that, despite our human flaws and limitations, we can do great things when we surrender ourselves to the divine.